The people who suffer most in a recession are usually not the ones who never heard the warning. They are the ones who heard it too late to rearrange their position. That is the real danger. By the time a recession feels obvious, most of the decisive financial choices have already been made. The debt was already accumulated. The lifestyle was already expanded, the emergency fund was already neglected, the habits were already installed, the attention was already trained to react instead of think, and once the slowdown becomes visible, all of those old decisions begin showing up at once. That is why I say a recession is not mainly an event. It is an exposure test. So let me give you the one mother line that everything in this story serves. A recession does not create your financial weakness. It reveals whether your life was built for optionality or for dependency before the stress arrived. That is the line. Not panic itself, not bad luck itself, not one job cut, not one market crash, preparedness. Because once you understand that, the whole frame changes. Cash is no longer laziness. Debt is no longer just a monthly payment. Spending is no longer harmless identity expression. Media is no longer just information. A recession stops looking like weather and starts looking like a wealth transfer event governed by structure. The people who come out ahead do not improvise their way there in the middle of the storm. They positioned earlier. That is the deeper truth. Now let me show you the mechanisms. The first mechanism is liquidity readiness. Most people think cash is passive. In a recession, cash becomes aggressive. That is the point almost nobody learns early enough. Liquidity readiness means having enough real accessible cash that your first response to stress is not desperation. If income slows, if hours get cut, if the market drops, if a landlord raises rent, if a roof leaks, if a business owner suddenly needs to sell a quality asset below its true value, cash turns from a boring line item into decision-making power. That is why I have always treated liquidity as strategic, not timid. The investor with no cash enters a downturn in one emotional state. The investor with reserves enters it in another. The first person is trying to protect the present. The second person is scanning for future advantage. That difference is enormous because liquidity does not only buy assets, it buys composure. A real cash cushion lets you think clearly while others are reacting. It prevents you from selling good assets at bad prices just to survive the month. It lets you wait, compare, inspect, and act when opportunities emerge from other people. Urgency. Most people imagine recessions as broad destruction. In practice, recessions often become giant discount windows for the people whose cash position allowed them to remain patient while everybody else became price insensitive. That is liquidity readiness. Now let us move to the second mechanism. I call it debt compression. There is something people almost never fully absorb about debt. Debt is not just money you owe. It is future effort already spoken for. That is why it becomes so dangerous in a downturn. When income is stable and life is smooth, debt can hide inside the background music of modern adulthood. The payment clears, the card balance rolls, the car loan feels manageable, the mortgage is just part of the month. People mistake this routine for safety. Then the cycle shifts, income drops, hours shrink, customers disappear, overtime vanishes, and the debt keeps asking the same question on the same day at the same amount. That is debt compression. Your financial world shrinks. But the obligation does not. The room narrows. The debt stays full size. This is why I've watched smart, decent, hardworking people fall so fast in recessions. Not because they were careless in some theatrical way. Because leverage that felt normal in expansion becomes suffocating in contraction. A $4,000 credit card balance at 20+% interest is not a small inconvenience. It is a leak in the future so aggressive that every month you delay fixing it. The hole gets wider. This is why the investor who enters recession owing little is playing a different game from the investor who enters owing much. The first has room, the second has timers. Debt compression is not just a balance sheet issue, it is a clarity issue. The more you owe, the harder it becomes to think. The harder it becomes to think, the worse you act. That spiral ruins more lives than most market crashes do. Now let us move to the third mechanism. I call it consumption identity. This is one of the quietest and most expensive forms of fragility in modern life. Most people do not just spend for utility. They spend for self. Recognition. The apartment says something. The car says something. The clothes say something. The vacations say something. The dining habits say something. After a while, consumption stops being a choice and becomes a mirror. That is consumption identity. The danger is not moral, the danger is structural. If your sense of self is tied to expensive habits, then any attempt to reduce spending during a downturn feels like personal collapse rather than strategic adjustment. You do not feel as though you are merely cutting costs. You feel as though you are becoming smaller. That is why people keep the payment, keep the subscription stack, keep the status vehicle, keep the inflated lease, even when the balance sheet is begging for relief. They are not just defending lifestyle, they are defending identity. That is why this mechanism matters so much heading into recession. The people with the strongest consumption identities are often the least flexible when flexibility becomes the only thing that matters. Meanwhile, the people whose identities are tied to principles, patience, and future freedom, rather than visible consumption, can adjust much more quickly. They can cut without feeling annihilated. They can protect liquidity without feeling humiliated. That is not a personality quirk. That is a form of resilience. Now let us move to the fourth mechanism. I call it environment architecture. A lot of financial advice worships willpower. I do not. Willpower is real. It is also unreliable. People are tired, people are stressed, people get lonely, people get flattered by spending, people panic, people rationalize. That is normal. Environment architecture means designing your system so the right behavior happens before your weak moment gets a vote. Automatic transfers, payroll deductions, savings routes that fire on payday friction on spending, simplicity in accounts, a structure where the future gets paid first instead of whatever remains after emotion finishes with the month. That is how discipline becomes durable. The same is true socially. The people around you matter. If your circle normalizes overspending, upgrades, excuses, fear, and reaction, you will absorb those rhythms. If your circle normalizes planning, restraint, long-term thinking, and intelligent patience, you will absorb those rhythms too. Humans copy their environment much faster than they admit. That is why environment architecture is so powerful. You do not rise mainly through motivation. You rise through the systems and social patterns that make the better action feel natural enough to repeat. Now let us move to the fifth mechanism. I call it attention capture. This one becomes especially expensive in recessions because it attacks judgment directly. The media economy does not profit from your calm. It profits from your arousal. That means fear, urgency, outrage, and extreme predictions get amplified far beyond their usefulness. In a downturn, that becomes devastating. Every headline competes to sound more alarming. Every platform wants you glued to the possibility of disaster. Every hour of your attention gets taxed by panic language that encourages reaction, that is attention capture. And here is what makes it so destructive. Financial mistakes in recessions are rarely caused by lack of information. They are caused by too much emotionally loaded information arriving faster than the nervous system can metabolize it. People sell because they cannot think. They freeze because they cannot think. They mistake noise for guidance and acceleration for intelligence. The investor who protects attention, protects decision quality. That may be the most underrated edge in the entire cycle. Because a recession is not only a test of balance sheets, it is a test of mental bandwidth. The person who can turn the volume down, go back to fundamentals, and ask simple, sober questions. What is this actually worth? What is my cash position? What can I buy? What must I not do? Is already operating at an advantage over the crowd. That is why stillness becomes a financial asset. Now let us move to the sixth mechanism. I call it recession transfer. Most people speak about recessions as though wealth simply disappears. That is not how it works. Some wealth is destroyed, much wealth is transferred. That is recession transfer. Assets change hands, ownership changes hands. Properties move from overstretched borrowers to liquid buyers. Companies move from frightened shareholders to patient accumulators. Great businesses get marked down because the public cannot separate price from value under pressure. The recession does not invent the transfer. It accelerates it. That is why preparation matters so much. The person who built liquidity, reduced high-interest debt, simplified lifestyle, and kept their mind clear is not just safer in the downturn. They are positioned to harvest what the downturn throws loose. The person who did not prepare becomes part of the supply. They sell because they must. The other side buys because it can. That is the hidden cruelty and opportunity of every recession. It is not merely a test of courage, it is a sorting machine. Now, let us move to the seventh mechanism. I call it freedom construction. This is the whole reason the other principles matter. Money is not the end. Optionality is. A person can have a decent income and still be trapped. A person can have more modest means and still possess room, dignity, and freedom because their systems are solid and their obligations are light. Recession preparation is not about becoming obsessed with collapse. It is about building a life where the economic weather has less control over your psychology and your choices. That is freedom construction. An emergency fund is not just cash, it is decision-making time. Debt reduction is not just cleaner math, it is less future ownership by someone else. Automation is not just convenience, it is self-protection. Lower lifestyle dependency is not just frugality, it is maneuverability. Clearer attention is not just peace of mind, it is better judgment when judgment is scarce. That is why I say recessions happen for you if you are ready. Not because pain is good, because prepared people can turn the same event that shrinks other lives into one that enlarges their future. Now I want to force the identity shift because without it, this still sounds like recession advice instead of a durable philosophy. Stop thinking like someone hoping to survive the downturn. Start thinking like a readiness builder. A survivor asks, "What if bad things happen to me?" A readiness builder asks, "What can I rearrange now so that bad conditions increase my options instead of eliminating them?" A survivor wants reassurance. A readiness builder wants structure. A survivor reacts when the fear arrives. A readiness builder has already built enough liquidity, enough clarity, enough simplicity, and enough room that fear does not run the whole system. That is the stronger identity. Because once you think that way, every month before the recession matters, every spending choice matters, every debt payment matters, every automated transfer matters, every attention decision matters. The downturn is not where the wealth gap is created. It is where the earlier positioning is revealed. And now let me give you the operating system plainly. First, calculate exactly how many months you can survive. If income stops tomorrow, if it is under 6, that becomes the priority. Second, attack high-interest debt first, because expensive leverage destroys clarity and compresses your future faster than almost anything else. Third, separate identity from consumption. A recession punishes people who cannot reduce lifestyle without feeling erased. Fourth, automate the right behaviors, so your future does not depend on daily willpower. Fifth, protect your attention. Fear, base noise taxes judgment. At the exact moment, judgment becomes most valuable. Sixth, remember that recessions transfer assets from the overextended to the prepared position. Accordingly, seventh, define freedom as your true goal. The point is not money worship. The point is a life where economic stress does not own your mind. That is the heart of it. The 2026 recession will not create winners and losers from nothing. It will reveal who used the months beforehand to build room and who used them to increase dependency. That is why Do This Now matters. Not because urgency sounds exciting, because timing changes the whole outcome. Now, let me end where this really matters. You can keep hoping the slowdown will somehow miss you. You can keep treating cash as laziness, debt as background noise, lifestyle as harmless, and media panic as unavoidable. You can keep assuming that when things get worse, you will somehow become calm, disciplined, and clear, even if you have not built any structure that would make that likely. Or you can do the harder thing. You can build the cushion. You can reduce the debt. You can simplify the identity. You can automate the future. You can guard your attention. And you can enter the recession not as someone waiting to be hurt, but as someone ready to decide. That is the threshold. Because the people who come out wealthier on the other side are not usually magicians. They are the ones who stopped mistaking good times for permanent conditions and built a machine that could keep working when everyone else's machine began to fail. That is the mirror. Look into it carefully. If your current life still gives you no room to think, when the pressure rises, then, whatever else is true, the recession still owns too much of your future. The moment you begin taking that future back is the moment the preparation really starts.